Thank you. So I'll start. So today I'll talk about crystal for stable Grothendieck polynomials. This is a joint work with Jennifer Morse from University of Virginia and Wen Simple, who is my colleague, a graduate student in UC Davis, and Anna Schilling, who is my advisor. So first, I need to tell you about the stable Grothendieck. What are they and why we study them? So a brief motivation is that they actually arrive from geometry. So in geometry, when we want to compute the intersection numbers, there's Schubert calculus is for the purpose. So you can, for example, if you are studying flag varieties, there are Schubert classes. Then you can take the cut product to compute their intersection number, which is given by the constant C with all the indices. And actually, they have their polynomial representatives. So in this case, they are the Schubert polynomials. And in order to compute the intersection number above, we can instead compute the polynomial product. Then we get the same constant that we want. So this is a brief idea. And there are many different geometric object and different kind of cohomology theory. There are different polynomial representatives. For example, in the Grassmannian, if you consider cohomology, their polynomial representatives are the Schur functions. And if you take the cohomology for flag varieties, you get Schubert polynomials, which is in the previous slide. And you take instead of taking the ordinary cohomology, if you take the K-theory of the Grassmannian, you get the Grassmannian Grothendieck polynomials. And if you take the K-theory for the flag varieties, you will get the Schubert polynomials, which the Grothendieck polynomials, which is what we're talking about today. For the Schubert polynomials and the Grothendieck polynomials, they are not symmetric. But if you take their stable limit, you actually get symmetric functions. So in the stable limit of Schubert polynomials, you will get Stanley symmetric function. And for the Grothendieck polynomial, if you take the stable limit, you get the stable Grothendieck polynomials. So they are discovered by these people. So one fundamental question in Schubert calculus is how to compute intersection number. So here we can also ask, how do we compute the intersection number in the for the K-theory using the K-theory of flag varieties? So in general, it's a very difficult problem, and there's no combinatorial interpretation of those constants. So one idea is to find combinatorial object associated to these polynomials. So one successful example is on the Stanley symmetric functions. Jennifer Morse and Anna Schilling, they found a crystal structure on the Stanley symmetric function. So I'll talk about what crystal is in a little bit. So now just think they are directed labeled graphs. And using the crystal structures on the combinatorial object underlying the Stanley symmetric functions, they were able to compute the intersection number for the cohomology of flag varieties in some special cases. For the Grothendieck polynomials, Monical, Pechenik, and Scrimshaw, they have also tried to find a crystal structure on the stable Grothendieck polynomial. However, their crystal is, they use the so-called Hecke insertion we'll talk about in a little bit, and they find a non-local crystal structures. So that's where our project started. We decided that can we find a local crystal structure? So I'll explain a little bit what local means. It's some property that's nice, involves a very small change in the combinatorial object. So in order to define the stable Grothendieck polynomial, I need to introduce some concept. So first, we need to define the zero hakamonoid. So the zero hakamonoid, we use the notation H, 0 of n. So it's a monoid of all finite words in letters 1 through n minus 1. And their relation is very similar to the symmetric function symmetric group or permutation group. But instead of having reflections, we have idempotents. So it's a degenerate symmetric group. So the relations are every generator is the idempotent, and this is, you can think that's some sort of braid relation, but they don't have to differ by one. And if the letter differ, they are far apart, then they commute. So we can do some examples. So if you have a word 2112, then because each letter is a generator is a idempotent, so we can crash the two together and get 212. Or we can also apply a braid relation and get 1-to-1. And the next one, 2121. So we can, for example, first apply a braid relation to convert the 212 into 1-to-1, then clash the two ones in the end, get 1-to-1 or 2-1-2. You can see that 2-1-1-2 and 2-1-2-1 are equivalent because they both equal to 1-to-1 or 2-1-2. And they both have one extra letter than the shortest letter possible. So 1-to-1 is a reduced word. 2-1-2-1 or 2-1-1-2, they are not reduced because we can make them even shorter. Okay, last example, 3-1-3-1-2. Can I have some audience participation? I guess no. Oh, okay.
1-3-1.
We can.
3-2.
Right. So we can, because 3 and 1 commute, so we can just keeping 1 for each. In this case, so this is not very complex concept. We just the 0 hakamonoid, and on top of that, we can have the notion of decreasing factorizations, which means that you have a Hecke word, then we put them into factors where each factors is a strictly decreasing letters. So for example, I'll talk with the example below. So for example, we have the 1-3-2, which is a reduced word, but we can always expand them because using the equivalence relation. So for example, 3-1-3-1-2 is a decreasing factorization of the element 1-3-2 in the 0 hakamonoid. And we use the notation HW is the reduced word, M is number of factors. So in this example, I listed 6 decreasing factorizations. So they are all the decreasing factorizations for 1-3-2 of length 5 and 3 factors. Okay, after that, we can finally define the stable Grothendieck polynomials for W. So we can think them as generating functions for decreasing Hecke factorization. So for each decreasing factorization, that's equivalent to W and with M factors, we first take the beta power. That is, we sum over all the lengths of each factor, which is the length of the word. So in the previous example, it would be 5 because the length is in 5. Then we minus the length of its reduced word. That means beta counts the number of extra letters you throw into the Hecke word. Then we take xi to the number of letters in the i's factor. So here we label the factors from right to left, the first factor, second factor, mth factor. So that's the definition of the stable Grothendieck polynomial. Let's do an example, again with the word 1-3-2. So there are 2 reduced Hecke word, 1-3-2 and 3-2-1. Now we can write down decreasing factorization for constant term. So constant term means beta to 0. We do not throw in extra letters. And if you think of that, we only have 3 x1, x2, and x3, and that's all of them. I'm skipping some empty factors. Like you can put the empty factor here or here or here. So there are actually 3 of them in different locations. And so the beta to the 0 constant term for for this polynomial is given by, so let me explain how we get that. So when we put the empty factor on the leftmost, we get x1, x2 squared, which is this one. If we take the empty factor in the middle, we get x1, x3 squared, etc. We get the red part correspond to this two decreasing factorization, but there are 6 of them because you can put the empty factors in different places. Then the blue parts, they are, we can put the letters all in separate factors. Then we get x1, x2, x3, and 2 of them. And in the end, we actually get the sure of shape 2, 1. So is it always true that you can, for each beta term, you can write them as sure, a sum of sure? Or alternatively, it's asking, is stable Grothendieck polynomial sure positive? The answer is yes. It's proven by Fang and Green 1998 that they give a combinatorial description of the sure expansion of stable Grothendieck polynomial, where the coefficient GW lambda is given by counting certain semi-standard Young tableau. So if we continue the computation, we can get the beta constant term, beta power, beta square, etc. So this is actually a power series. Although it's called a polynomial, it's not really a polynomial. It has infinite many terms. Okay, so next I'll talk about one extra thing, that is 3-to-1 avoiding Hecke word. So usually in combinatorics or somewhere, when people start talk about pattern avoidance, it's because that case is difficult. So we want to avoid the pattern 3-to-1 here. So what is a 3-to-1 avoiding Hecke word? So they are also called fully commutative. So basically they are, if none of the reduced expression of an element in a zero hakamonoid contains a consecutive subword of the form I plus 1 I. So we can see some examples. So the word 1, 3, 2, 1 is equivalent to 3, 1, 2, 1. So there is a braid relation here. So this is not 3-to-1 avoiding. But the next one, we can try to write its equivalent reduced words, and we do not see braid. So this is 3-to-1 avoiding. And we use the notation star on top on the right corner to denote the set of decreasing factorization into m factors for 3-to-1 avoiding W. And similarly, we can talk about decreasing factorization, whether they are 3-to-1 avoiding or not 3-to-1 avoiding, by looking at the words that underline by removing all the factors, because 1-to-1 contains a braid, and 3-1-2 does not contain a braid. So we can talk about whether they are in the star or not star. So star means 3-to-1 avoiding. Some notation. Okay, so now we've talked about the stable Grothendieck polynomial for W. We can also talk about Grothendieck polynomials for skew shapes. So it's defined by Book that this can be this is a generating function of a semi-standard set value tableau of skew shape. So you take all of them, then the beta power is the excess, which is extra letter, like more letters than the semi-standard Young tableau. Guess it's, and the x1 is just xi's power is just number of I in there. So for a semi-standard set value tableau, so when you have a skew shape and there's a value filling that in order for it to be semi-standard. So there are 2 criteria. It's pretty similar to the semi-standard Young tableau. So recall, semi-standard Young tableau is weakly increasing in row and strictly increasing in the column. So this is also similar, but you have to consider the maximum and the minimum. So in the row, the maximum of a cell has to be weakly smaller than minimum of its right neighbor, and has to be strictly smaller then it's the minimum of its neighbor above. So here we're using French notation, so this is the next row or along the column. Okay, next I'll require some audience participation. So which one is a valid filling for the Skillship 3-2 skill 1? So row is weakly increasing, track maximum with minimum of its right neighbor and neighbor above. So is this a semi-standard set value tableau?
No.
Or because the 4 is bigger than the 3, right? So it violated this condition. About this one, the one in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Well, look again.
Well, the method
the
A
top.
is
Right.
2, right?
Oh,
Right,
but
this
on the top.
4.
Always.
This 4 is smaller than 3 because we look at the minimum of its right neighbor.
Oh.
So it is not a semi-standard, but this one is indeed semi-standard. All right, great. so now I'm done talking about stable, Grothendieck, the basics. Next, we'll talk about crystal. So it's in the title. So let me explain a little bit. So what is crystal and why we care about crystal? So I've told you that crystal is just some combinatorial stuff. You can think as directed labeled graph. So why do we care about them? So this is algebra and number theory seminar. So I suppose people care about representations, how to do stuff with them, do very complicated things with them. I'm not like expert on that, but I know a little bit, so I'm going to share that with you. So algebraic, of course, they think about irreducible representations of maybe classically algebra quantum group, and they wanted to take tensor product. And the question is that how to count the multiplicities in when you decompose the tensor product of two irreducibles. So crystal give an approach to solve this problem combinatorially. For each irreducible representations V lambda, we can associate a connected crystal graph to it. We call B lambda with the same partition. Then we can take tensor product of the crystal graph. This is given by purely combinatorial description, and this can give you the multiplicity C with bunch of indices. So in the case of type A, these indices are the Littlewood-Richardson coefficient. They count certain number of tableaux. So to give you a little bit more, forgot. So for each crystal connected crystal graph B lambda, the character is Schur function of Schur polynomial S lambda. So give a more specific example. Here is so in here I have drawn the standard representation of SL3, which is type A 2-Lie algebra 3x3 traceless matrices. So the background lattice is the weight lattice. Around the 6 gray dots are the roots. And the red dots are the weight lattices for the standard representation. Some people use L1, L2, L3. Some people use E. Now, next, if you one question to think is, if I take the tensor product of the standard representation with itself, what do I get? So I've drawn the Placid graph here. So the algebraic would tell you that if you look at the 6 solid dots, 3 red and 3 blue, they will give you a symmetric square representation of A2. And the 3 circle, big circle, they will give you the exterior square actually. So you get 2 irreducible components from this tensor product. And of course, they add up to be 9 dimensions, which is good. So you can see this take a well-trained graduate student to carefully peel off like highest weight and do some calculation. Alternatively, Crystal give you approach. So here I'll tell you the Crystal way. So here we have standard representation of A2. So here I give you a standard Crystal graph. So 1 go to 2, go to 3, and another one go to 2, go to 3. Then I take tensor product of the 2 crystal graph. And so I'm skipping the detail of the description, but they are completely combinatorial. So I get these nodes and they are connected by this crystal operator. So this means F1, F2, etc. And you can see there are 2 connected components, 1 red, 1 blue. So this red part has 6 nodes. It means it corresponds to the symmetric square, and the 3 blue will correspond to the exterior square. And you can compute the characters for the crystals, the red one. So the character is taking just x to the number of I in the element. You get sure of S1, S11, and S2. So that just gives you some idea how the crystal can come into play.
Sorry, what's xi again?
Here, this is character for the crystal graph. So this gives you x1 square, x1, x2, x1, x3, etc.
Right, thanks.
Right. So that give you a little bit idea of why a lot of people care about crystal. So next, so we've talked about a stable Grothendieck polynomial, and I told you that they are the generating function of decreasing Hecke factorizations. So what we did is that we defined a crystal structure on the decreasing factorizations that are 3-to-1 avoiding. So let me tell you how the crystal is defined. So basically, you start with a decreasing factorization, and the crystal operator will take you to another decreasing factorization by doing the following thing. So I'll explain with the example. So you're given a Fi and a decreasing factorization. Then what you do is you look at the I plus 1s and the i's factors. So for example, if you have 1 and 3, 2, we'll do the following. You start with the largest letter on the left. In this case, it's 1. Then you pair it with the smallest letter that's greater or equal to itself on the right. So in this case, 1 will be paired with 2. And in this case, we are done because there's no, we've tried everything on the left. So in this case, we find the largest unpaired letter on the right, which is 3. And we check that 3 plus 1 is not in the 2 factors. So we just move the 3 over to the left and get 3, 1, 2. So this is the crystal operator, how it acts on this pair of decreasing factors. And we can do a more complicated example. We have longer factors. So we do it again. Start with the largest letter, so here's 7. We try to find the smallest letter on the right that's bigger or equal to itself, but we couldn't. So 7 is left unpaired. So we proceed to 5. And we find that 6 is the smallest letter that's greater or equal to 5. So 5 is paired with 6. And then we go on to 3. Because the 6 has already been paired with the 5, so we cannot pair 6 with the 3. But then the left numbers, there's nothing that's greater or equal to 3. So 3 becomes unpaired. And in the end, 2 will pair with the 2. So that's the pairing. When we're done with the pairing, we again locate the largest unpaired letter on the right. In this case, it's 1. and we find that 1 plus 1 is in both factors. So we have to remove 2 from the right and add 1 to the right, to the left. And you can check that the resulting 2 factors, this is equivalent to this one under the 0 hakamonoid. So that's the star crystal structure on the decreasing factorizations of 0 hakamonoid. That's 3-to-1 avoiding. So what can we do with this? So this gives you a better idea, I think. So we've computed the Schur expansion of the stable Grothendieck polynomial for 1, 3, 2. So for constant term, so now we look at the linear term. So we can list. So we can list all. So beta is 2 to 1. So it means we throw in 1 extra letter. So it means the lengths for them should be 4. So then. If you think only 3 factors, so we only have x1, x2, x3, we can list all the decreasing factorizations for 1, 3, 2 with lengths 4 and 3 factors. So there are 12 of them. Then with the crystal operators we defined earlier, we can organize them into connected, into 3 connected directed graphs with edge labeling. And if you look at the Schur expansion, so there are 3 Schur in the linear term. That means there are 3 connected components. Actually, the S22 correspond to this component, and S211 they correspond these 2 isomorphic components. So here we can associate crystal graphs to stable Grothendieck polynomials. So that is one crystal structure. In general, there are many different combinatorial models for crystals. So the most famous one is semistandard Young tableau. Here we just talk about this one on the on decreasing factorization. We can also have a crystal structure on the set value tableau. We just talk about a semistandard set value tableau. So they are defined by Monical, Pechenik, and Scrimshaw. So I'll just briefly go through it with the example. So your first is assigned. So here, say we are operating the crystal operator F2, so I equals 2. So what we do is we assign a minus to every column of the tableau containing an I, but not an I plus 1. And a plus to every column containing an I plus 1, but not an I. So I've put the plus, that's for the 3, minus for this 2. This minus is for this 2. So I put out my signs. Then I successively pair each plus that is adjacent to an I. So plus has to go first. So this plus is paired with this minus. Then the F crystal operator will change the rightmost unpaired I to an I plus 1. Except some cases, I think in this case, it's just straightforward. So we just change this 2 into a 3. That's the only thing that happened in this operation. And we can do a little bit more complicated example. So when we do F4, so put a minus for the 4, put a plus for the 5, and nothing gets paired because there's no plus that's to the left of the minus. And the crystal operator wanted to change the rightmost unpaired I to an I plus 1, meaning change this 4 into a 5. But we know if we do that, this would not be semi-standard. So instead, we have to move the I over. We need to move this 4 over and make it into a 5. So now the 5 is very lonely. It's in its original cell, but this is to keep the semi-standardness in the process. And these people prove that this is a valid crystal. That's actually come from the representation. Okay, so we have talked about 2 crystals for now. The one on semi-standard set value tableau and the one that we defined for the decreasing factorization, and they are actually related to each other via this so-called residue map. So let me tell you what that is. So recall our notation HM star. It's a set of all 3-to-1 avoiding decreasing factorization with M factors. And the residue map will send a set value tableau to a decreasing factorization that's 3-to-1 avoiding. So the map is defined the following way. Let's look at this example. So we first associate the cell in row I, column J with the length of the number of rows plus column index minus row index. So I have written them down in red numbers here. So these are the letters I put in each cell. Then we can form I's factor in the decreasing factorization by taking the labels of all cells in T containing I in decreasing order. So for example, if we look at there are 2 5s in this set value tableau, and they each have 4 and 2 in their label. So the 5th factor in this decreasing factorization will contain 4, 2. And next I look at the 4. There are 2 4s. They contain 2 and 1. So 2, 1 will be the element in the 4th factor. And so on. The 3 has 1 and 2, 2. So that's 4, 3. And 1, just a 3. So we obtained a decreasing factorization with 5 factors. So this one is actually 3-to-1 avoiding. So actually it will always be 3-to-1 avoiding. And furthermore, that is actually a bijection in some sense. Okay, so how does this residue map connect the 2 crystal structures I've just talked about? So this is on the left, we have crystal on the semi-standard set value tableau. On the right, we have crystal on the decreasing factorization. And the residue map make these 2 crystal structure intertwine with each other, which means that if you take a set value tableau and you can operate a crystal operator on it, then you can obtain decreasing factorization. On the right, this diagram commute. I think that's our first result. And next, I'll talk about insertion algorithm after the thing on the crystal. So usually insertion algorithms are invented to form a bijection onto equinumerous sets. I think in algebraic combinatorics, the most famous insertion algorithm is probably the RSK insertion, which induce a bijection on generalized permutations and a pair of tableaux. So today I'll talk about 3 insertion algorithms. The first one is the Hecke insertion algorithm by these people. So this is the Hecke insertion algorithm will provide a bijection between decreasing Hecke factorization and a pair of tableaux, where P is an increasing tableau, which means they are semi-standard Young tableau where the row has to be increasing too. Q is just a semi-standard Young tableau, and they have to have the same shape. So I think the detail of it is not super important. So I just show you this example. So here notice one thing that for a decreasing Hecke factorization, we can write them into a compatible byword, which means we write these letters in the second line, and the first line is their factor number. For example, this is the 4th factor, so I just put a 4 there. And when you do the Hecke insertion, the insertion works like you do 2, then put a 3 there, and the 1 will bump the 2 up, and then you insert a 3. In this case, 3 is already there, so it's observed, and the 3 we have like set value in the queue. Anyways, in the end, you get an increasing tableau and a set value tableau. That's semistandard. So how is this related to what we're doing? So we find that it's quite interesting that if you start with a set value tableau, then we apply the residue map, we get a Hecke byword, then we do the Hecke insertion just as defined. Then it turned out that the recording tableau Q will be exactly same as the set value tableau we started with. So it's in some sense this the residue map kind of undoes the Hecke insertion. So we find that's quite interesting. And furthermore, we also defined a star insertion in our case. So given a decreasing factorization, that's 3-to-1 avoiding, we can obtain its Hecke byword. Then we defined an insertion algorithm. Let me briefly explain how it's done. So we start from the right. So 1 is here. Then we insert the 3 because 3 is greater than 1. So we just append it. Then next is the 2. So because 2 is not in this row, so we bump the minimal z that's greater than x. So in this case, it's the 3. So this 2 will bump the 3 up. Next is 4, because 4 is greater than everything in the first row, so it just append to the end. Okay, the next one then is, this is an interesting case. When we insert 2 into this tableau, because 2 is already in this row, so we need to do rule number 3. We need to proceed to next row with the minimum y such that the consecutive interval yx is in that row. So the basic means, okay, 2 is here, then find the smallest number so that the consecutive, like leftmost, so the entire interval is in the row. So in this case, it's 1 because 1, 2 is a consecutive interval. So in this case, we do nothing to this first row, but insert 1 into the next column, next row. In which case 1 will bump 3. So you can see that the insertion tableau is not semi-standard because the column is not strictly increasing. Actually, the transpose of our insertion tableau are indeed semi-standard. So we get a column weakly increasing and the row strictly increasing tableau. Okay, then the last one is inserting 4 because 4 is already in the row. We use rule number 4, but the 3 is not there. So we just insert 4 to the next row. So in the end, we get a conjugate of a semi-standard Young tableau and a semi-standard Young tableau. And we show that it's a bijection of the pair of tableau and decreasing factorization that are 3-to-1 avoiding. So furthermore, we show that this is associated to our star crystal we talked about earlier. Basically, it's so you have a decreasing Hecke factorization, and you can apply the star in our insertion algorithm, get a pair of tableau, and you can apply the crystal operator we just defined on the decreasing factorization, get something here. And again, you can apply the insertion and get a pair of them. So there are two things. One thing is that the insertion tableau is invariant under the crystal operator on the left. And the second is that the crystal on the semi-standard tableau, the recording tableau, intertwines with the crystal on the decreasing factorization via our insertion. So basically it says that this crystal structure can be explained by this insertion algorithm with crystal structure on the recording tableau. Okay, I think last result is on the uncrowding algorithm. So it's not called insertion, but because we actually perform RSK insertion in the middle, so I'm putting it on under the insertion algorithm. So so when you have a semi-standard set value tableau, there's a very natural way to obtain semi-standard Young tableau by doing certain RSK algorithm. So for example, you are given this set value tableau. First, you identify the topmost row contain a multi-cell. So it's the row 2. Then you find the largest letter in that row that lies in the multi-cell. In this case, it's 5. Then you delete it and perform RSK algorithm. So 5 is inserted to next row, and we do it repeatedly. So next topmost largest element in the multi-cell is 4. So we delete 4 and perform RSK insertion. So the 4 will bump the 5. The next one will be the 5, and it just goes up. Then the 2 will bump the 3 will bump 4 will bump 5. So in the end, you get a semi-standard Young tableau of skew shape. And the interesting thing is that, remember, we've defined the star insertion and the residue map. There is an interesting association to the uncrowding map. So we start with a set value tableau, and we can perform the uncrowding. So the 4 goes up, then the 2 bump the 3, so we get a semi-standard Young tableau here. And on the right, we can perform the residue map and get a Hecke decreasing factorization. And there, we can perform our star insertion and get a pair of tableaux. And it turned out that the recording tableau is always the same as the result of the uncrowding map. So like we have our object with residue map and star insertion. Our crystal, it just turned out to have a lot of interesting relation to things that's already known. But so far, we've only talked about 3-to-1 avoiding cases because the cases containing a braid is so difficult. Okay, let me talk a little bit about what we have done on those cases. So when there are only 2 letters for H3, so the Hecke word in 1 and 2, we actually find a crystal structure on them with some interesting twisting rule. For example, this F2 operator will change the 1 and 2, but sometimes it doesn't change. There's like even odd switch behavior, but in the end, they do only change a pair of factors. It's local, and the words are all equivalent to 1-to-1, or like each connect component have the same, their Hecke words are all equivalent. However, when we want to extend it to more general cases, we find a counterexample. So these are the properties we have in mind. The first thing is that Fi only change adjacent 2 factors, i's and i plus 1's, and that is determined by the first i plus 1's factor, and it doesn't change the underlying Hecke word or its excess. But then there we find a counterexample where they cannot coexist. So future work. So we have defined the insertion on 3-to-1 avoiding word. Can we generalize to all words? Is it possible to find an insertion? So we were talking about some tableau insertion. Maybe we can find using a different combinatorial object. And at the beginning, I mentioned that this all started with computing the intersection number in the K-theory of flat varieties. But remember, the polynomial representatives for the K-theory of flat varieties are the Grothendieck polynomials. But we are doing stable Grothendieck polynomial, which is different. So one idea is that the major crystal is a specific subset of a crystal. Can we use that to find a way to compute the intersection number? Okay, references. And the most important of all, my collaborators. So this is Jennifer Morse from University of Virginia. Wensing Po is my colleague, who is another grad student. Anna Schilling is my advisor. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments?
Well, I'll venture maybe a dumb question. Am I to understand that your Grothendieck polynomials have a natural categorification in terms of these K-theories? It all went by very fast for me.
Oh, yeah. That's, let me go to the beginning. I think it's in somewhere here.
Yeah, I mean, there's this whole business of categorification, you know, like various polynomials. The Jones polynomial is a categorification,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So you have a bunch of these polynomials, but at the very beginning, there's some K theory floating around. I never quite caught the connection, but is there a categorification of your Grothendieck polynomials?
I'm not entirely sure your question. I'm trying to guess what I think. So K theory is just it's like like cohomology. It's a topological invariance, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess what I'm asking, maybe this question goes in the wrong direction. I mean, usually, as I understand categorification, which is not very well, I mean, you have an interesting set of polynomials like the Jones polynomial, and somebody comes up with a category.
Oh, in that sense.
Grothendieck group is essentially embodying, you know, this Jones polynomial. Now, I guess this probably goes in a different direction because you're computing in something like a K theory of these Grassmannian.
Right. Instead of like looking for a bigger or more, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, like in Kovanov homology, they build a whole cohomology theory around link invariance. And the cohomology calculations themselves are the categorification in that sense. But I wonder if something like that is happening here or something. It seems like it. I work on spaces of connection. All I do is work on semi-standard Young tableau counting as well for ramification data coming from these local systems. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, I personally don't know categorification very well, so but.
I mean, there's a Schur functor floating around here as well, right?
Schur functor where?
Oh, I thought they were. You said was there a Schur polynomial or a Schur something happening somewhere here?
Well, Schur functions or polynomial, they are the polynomial representatives for the cohomology of Grassmannian. Actually the Schubert's varieties of Grassmannian.
I see. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know.
But yeah, I don't think there's Schur functor. I'm not really talking much about like representation.
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, I mean, you're taking something and then you're looking at the combinatorics.
Yeah, but it's always interesting. So because you can see they are probably somehow related to representation theory in some way.
Yeah, D modules or something like that.
Yeah, but I don't know much about that area.
Okay. So any other questions or comments? Okay. So if no, then let's set the speaker again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And